All right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Shivam Patel, and I'm a sophomore at VCU, and thank you so much for attending my presentation today. I'm going to be talking to you about using ASMR to improve constipation-associated comorbidity of depression. Now, I know these terms don't really seem to make sense together, but I promise by the end we'll have created a very unique system that can come together, and this very unique form of therapy that we can use to address both of these conditions. And so let's look at it through the eyes of a patient encounter, because it's essentially like a mystery, and I like a good mystery, and I hope you do too. And so if this patient comes in with classical symptoms of constipation and depression and is only being treated with laxatives and antidepressants, and yet they're complaining that it's not helping them as much, then we need to find a more unique, new, novel way to address this issue. And before we do anything, we should let this patient know one thing. He's not alone. More than 33% of people suffer with both of these conditions together, and now that we've had a pandemic over the past year and so many things have happened, this number has probably skyrocketed, possibly into 50 or unfortunately even 60% of individuals. And so let's look at it through the eyes of the chemical ingredient, which is serotonin, which is our happiness neurotransmitter. So serotonin, or 5-HT, is produced in our gut, in our ENS, through enterochromaffin, or EC cells. These are basically our second brain of sorts, and they control all of the functionings of our digestive tract. And they are controlled by our parasympathetic and sympathetic responses from the brain in our autonomous nervous system. And so there's already one connection we see between the brain and the gut. And also, the fact that serotonin has been closely correlated to depression is something we can definitely exploit. And so, the leading theory right now is that low levels of serotonin lead to depression. And this is basically because of the fact that SSRIs work. However, just because increasing the amount of serotonin in the synaptic gap leads to fewer depressive symptoms doesn't mean that serotonin is the only factor. So we should keep that in our mind as well when we're exploring how or why serotonin works. And another thing to keep in mind is just this quick pathway, because we're going to see these appear quite a bit in studies that we have to explore to provide this proof. And so tryptophan, or TRP, is turned into 5-HTP via this rate-limiting enzyme, tryptophan hydroxylase, or TPH. And then that's eventually turned into serotonin down the line, and that's how we end up with this neurotransmitter. And so if serotonin is indeed the shared ingredient, we need to use it to our advantage to attack both of these conditions at the same time and improve both of them at the same time. And so one unique way to explore this is ASMR, or Autonomous Sensory Meridian Response. These individuals who are receptive to ASMR basically feel these tingles down their spine and their scalp when they're exposed to particular triggers, whether they be visual or auditory. And millions of videos have been posted on YouTube by creators, even specific ASMR creators, that try to induce ASMR intentionally by, making these particular noises or using these particular tingles or triggers to help these individuals feel relaxed. And so in the comment sections of these videos, so many people are saying that they feel better just watching these videos for so many conditions that they're experiencing in their normal lives. And so we should listen to this input and use it to help these individuals therapeutically and in a more medical sense. And so let's have our patient that's come in by exploring each of these individual aspects of this in more detail, so that way we can find solid proof as to how this can work. So the first thing we should look at is serotonin, right? And so serotonin is produced both in the central nervous system and the enteric nervous system via the Raphe nuclei and the EC cells, respectively. And like we were saying, the precursors are 5-HTP and TPH2. We see both of these precursors in both systems, and so that means both systems are performing some functions similarly in order to have these similar pathways be occurring at the same time. And so in a study by Israeli et al. In 2019, they basically tried to explore the role of serotonin in both constipation and depression. And so they altered the genotype of mice to induce this depression phenotype, basically. And what they saw was that when this was introduced, the mice had very low levels of serotonin in their CNS, and they showed behaviors that were typical of depression or constipation, especially something like the slower movement of the tail or reduced gut motility. And so this isn't just something seen in mice. People have also been reporting this for a while now. Insurance claims are showing both depression and constipation, or IBS, which is irritable bowel syndrome, being reported together much more than they're reported separately. And so this high correlation, even in just health insurance claims, show that there is a relationship and people are suffering with both of these things at the same time. But we shouldn't lose hope, because when serotonin precursors were reintroduced into these mice's system in this study, what we saw was a recovery of the functioning of the gut, and we saw improvements in constipation and even anatomical changes. And so we can use this to our advantage when we're trying to use human studies and improving the serotonin levels in those suffering from both conditions. And especially here, I like to show this image because this is really good, and it visualizes how when the depression phenotype was present, we saw the villi have a much smaller surface area and they look kind of shrunk here. But when the serotonin was reintroduced, we basically returned to much more normal levels, especially like that of the wild type mice. And so I would be amiss if I didn't say that the vast majority, 95% of the body's serotonin, is produced in the gut via the enteric nervous system. And yet we see it throughout the body doing so many things. And so there must be a connection. And so this connection is via gut-brain axis. And basically what we're saying is that this neuronal serotonin is affecting functioning of gut serotonin and gut motility. And so there is a microbiome in the gut that's also playing in the background. So these bacteria are very involved in how the gut works normally. And so production of metabolites or even, serotonin precursors is a function that these microbiota do. And without them, we'd pretty much be lost and lose all of our functioning. And to prove that, Yano et al. Did a study in 2015 that basically did just that. They removed all of the gut microbiota from mice, and basically we saw exactly what we'd expect. The levels of serotonin were extremely low, and then there was a buildup of tryptophan because it wasn't turned into serotonin. However, when we did recolonize the gut, the serotonin levels rebounded, and this is actually a lot like using probiotics such as Activia that people eat, so that way they can kind of recolonize their gut and improve their gut's functioning. And this basically shows the exact same thing happening. And so the connection between the gut and the brain is sort of a two-way system. So from the top down, the brain talking to the gut happens via the vagus nerve, and just sending signals of relaxation or a fight or flight response. But from the gut to the brain, there's a possibility that these microbiota are actually producing these little metabolites that are traveling through the blood and going up to the brain and possibly crossing the blood-brain barrier and talking to the cells in the brain to tell it about the conditions of the gut. And so this isn't necessarily 100% accurate because this is still being researched and very new info, but there's a connection present, there's a lot of similarities, and it's something to keep an eye out for, especially in future studies. And so if depression is something that we're seeing in the brain and yet we're seeing effects throughout the body, we know that it's something we can take a look at. But we should keep in mind that depression is not just something that is monotonous. It has many different effects and causes, and it's not just due to low serotonin, even though that's the prevailing theory. And we see that even in multiple studies, everyone's saying that even though we see decreased serotonin lead to these depressive phenotypes, it can't be the only factor that's present in affecting this. But we do see serotonin as a majority leader in these studies, and so it is something we can target to relieve these symptoms, and it's something we can use to help out individuals suffering from both constipation and depression. And so the most unique way we think to do it is ASMR, because that's something that really hasn't been explored yet. And so the triggers that we generally see are like whispering, role-playing, tapping, this personal attention, like direct interaction between the viewer and the ASM artist. And it's not just something small or niche anymore. It's something that's grown to have a huge community, and even YouTubers and even TikTokers are using it in their videos and on their platforms. And so, in a questionnaire study by Broughton Davis back in 2015, they found that more than half the individuals that felt tingles, they felt it with these specific triggers that were akin to a very relaxed environment. There's a lot of whispering, a lot of discrete sounds, slow movements, that type of thing. And more than 80% of people said that they had positive effects after experiencing this ASMR. A lot of them actually saw this effect wane off sometime within 3 hours, which is actually a pretty good time. But those who were depressed saw this happen a little faster. But it's not bad news, because what we actually saw was that the people who were depressed showed the greatest mean improvement. And so this means that they really were receptive to this ASMR, especially if they felt these tingles very strongly. And one thing to note is that the majority of people do not watch ASMR for sexual stimulation, even though there are a lot more videos out there right now for it. The most followed channels, especially these ones that I'm showing here, they do traditional ASMR, nothing out of the ordinary, just regular whispering, slow movements, anything like that, just for regular relaxation. And so one reason why ASMR might work is oxytocin, which is a hormone produced during breastfeeding. It leads to this emotional connection between the mother and the child, and because so many ASMR artists are women, there is a possibility that this kind of evolutionary remainder is allowing ASMR to work really well. And so just to recap, our basic pathway now that we've developed is that ASMR can be used to give these individuals like a mental high, and that mental high just floods them with positive emotions and helps their limbic system and influences their parasympathetic pathways. And so this allows their bowels to relax, and at the same time a lot more serotonin is produced in the gut that communicates with the brain. The brain produces more serotonin, we see more of it in the synaptic gap, and now we see concurrent improvement in both constipation and depression, hopefully, because that is exactly what we're trying to get at. And so if a study were to be designed, the first thing you'd want to make sure is you find the right trigger for each individual test subject. And so most people would say that they prefer shorter videos, smaller trigger objects. They're very close to the camera, low-pitched sounds, binaural audio, so utilizing both ears of the headphones, stuff like that. And just to see the effects of ASMR, we can actually use fMRI scans. So we see with these scans that there's a lot more activity in certain emotional arousal and empathy regions of the brain, especially during tingles. And so we can use any of these factors as measurements for why ASMR works, many physiological or anatomical changes. And so the main thing I want to leave you with is this basic overview of everything we've talked about. Depression, constipation both happen together quite a bit, and the connection is serotonin. And our goal is to use ASMR to increase that serotonin, so that way we can help both conditions at the same time. And hopefully we'll see a lot, of improvement in our patients. And in our John Doe patient right here, it looks like he turned out pretty well based on this therapy. So, good job to us. So I'd like to say a quick thank you to Professor Boyce, who guided me through this entire paper, and to my family for supporting me through all this. And just one last thing I'd like to mention. I know that a lot of depression has increased during this pandemic. And so I encourage you and everyone you know to just find whatever makes you happy, because happiness equals healthiness. And that's what we like to see. Thank you.